So we're really fortunate to have Carla here.
Very good. Well, I have a couple things I wanted to share with you. There are many things we could talk about, but I want to, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then let's just open it up and have a conversation. I guess, yeah, I have been in this field a very long time. I started in government and then came over to the nonprofit sector, and I'm not doing the affordable housing work, although there's an interesting tie into it. But for 15 years, I ran an organization that scaled from small to national, and helped create 100,000 units of supportive housing for homeless people around the United States. And so that experience has really colored what I'm doing. It inspired me greatly, and I came over to REDF 4 years ago, and kind of found a little gem that I felt like could do much more and shine a lot more brightly than it was. So here's what I thought I would share with you, just to kind of get it going. So 2 headlines in terms of what REDF's about. One is venture philanthropy, very close to your hearts, and something you are involved with. And for us, that means that we use essentially equity financing, grant money, and we provide it to nonprofit organizations that start businesses that intentionally employ people whose unemployment rates are like 3 to 5 times that of anybody else. People, many of whom have mental health and substance use issues, and also have been in prison or jail, young people who are disconnected from school and work, people who have experienced homelessness, people who have come out of foster care experiences, people who have been vets. I mean, it's sort of a one thing, but the thing that does characterize all these people is that they're not working at rates that vastly exceed that of most other Americans. And this is also true of sort of all people with disabilities, frankly, which is quite interesting. And there's a lot of parallel efforts going on, similar to what I'm going to talk to you about in that world, that are a bit more sophisticated. But we're more focused on people who, yes, they cross over with disability because they've got the mental health, substance use problems, but they're not generally physically disabled or developmentally disabled. They're really just people who haven't made it for a whole host of reasons that we could talk about all day. And the society misses their talents and their skills because they don't work, and they cost us a lot of money because they end up bouncing around through all these systems, and we invest it, and they touch on all these systems, and they don't go anywhere. And so we deploy capital and business assistance to nonprofits to help businesses in order to employ those people. That's A. And then second headline is we're about taking that kind of model to a much bigger scale around the country, because we think that every community in the United States could benefit from a tier of business, essentially, that is that pathway into the workforce for these individuals. And I mean, you all are, you're in this arena, you understand. I mean, the need today for things that, number one, actually work, and number two, don't cost government and philanthropy as much. It is like essential. If we don't have things like that, we're not going to make progress. And so this is, I think, one of those things. To achieve that second objective, essentially the headline there is we're about kind of aligning government, nonprofit, business, and philanthropy, both figuring out where the points of alignment are, like where do their self-interests coincide with ours, and then how do we help align the resources that they have to have greater impact. And I think that area, I mean, generally groups that do that kind of work often are referred to as intermediaries. Sometimes they're called venture philanthropies, but often they're called intermediaries. And that's a controversial type of organization, I guess. We can talk a little about that. Personally, I think when that's done well, that kind of entity is among the most powerful entities we have for social impact in the country. So, and I've really dedicated my career to working and making those kinds of entities work. And that's what REDF really is. So, so those are sort of the 2 headlines. And then I just wanted to illustrate through a story that's more accessible, kind of what this is really all about. So I just wanted to tell you very briefly kind of the story of Green Streets, which is one of the companies in our portfolio. I was just at the 1-year anniversary of Green Streets. I'm sorry for my back.
No, don't look at me, I'm fine.
So it's one of the companies that we chose for our portfolio. It's in San Francisco, provides recycling and janitorial services in public housing in the very low-income community called Bayview Hunters Point in San Francisco. So we were at this 1-year launch. I want to tell you very briefly kind of the story of that company. What happened is McCormick Barron Reagan, which is a very big, actually housing developer, national affordable housing developer. They're in New Orleans and LA and the Bay and St. Louis and a number of places. Very, very big. For-profit company. Manages the properties in the Bayview, some of these public housing projects. They're like the property managers, basically. So they made a deal with a solar company to come in and put in some solar equipment. And they realized that solar equipment was going to be vandalized if they didn't do something. So to do something, they said, all right, how about if you hire a few of our residents, and then maybe won't be vandalized. So they hired about 20 of the residents, had a good experience, and then that ended, right? Because they installed the solar equipment and the jobs were done. So the guy who manages the property thought this is actually crime in general went down on the property while this was happening. He thought, well, we should do more of it. So he went to a couple of the guys who had been involved in these jobs, and he said, look, if you can reduce our waste management costs by doing recycling, that's essentially going to be the stream of income for your company. Any incremental drop in our waste management costs is going to go into your pocket. You run it. I'm going to give you some technical assistance. He gave them a couple of people who knew business to help them. And he said, it's your company. So they went off and they figured this thing out and they started up the company. And they've been running for a year. We did a request for qualifications statewide for our new portfolio. And I could give you, maybe in the questions, I can give you sort of a sense of what we were looking for. But we were looking for, organizational capacity and leadership and mission fit and a number of other things we can go into. So they were selected as one of the companies. And so what do we do then? Where do we add value? The person who started REDF is George Roberts, works right down the road here at KKR. Every single time I see him, he says, how are you adding value? I mean, this is like the only question. And what's the impact? I mean, these are, which is exactly right. So I can tell you with this group, just to give you a sense, there's sort of the business side and there's the social side. So on the business side, I mean, they have a nascent business, but it is not fully scoped out. I mean, they don't really have a real sense of where this thing is going to go, and yet they aspire to do this in all of the MBR, all of the McCormick Barron Reagan properties in California and throughout the United States. These guys were up there. I mean, and these guys are very much from the hood and really feel that way. Lovely guys. Many of them, 19 with 2-year-old kids running around, and but they're like talking about taking this everywhere. We want to be in the suits on the plane, being consultants to the other properties, and I mean, it's really quite amazing. But they're not there. I mean, we don't even have really a legal structure that makes any sense right now. We've got MBR, which is a for-profit company. We've got Urban Strategies, which is their nonprofit offshoot that provides services in their properties. And then we've got Green Streets, and sort of whose is it, or what is it, or how is it incorporated, or all of that is much remains. Sort of what's the financial model, some infrastructure, all the business questions, both the assistance that we can provide to do all of that, and then setting out the metrics for the business. What are those metrics going to be? And in a general sense, since you raised the question about social enterprise, for us, we're not in this so that necessarily these companies are 100% self-supporting. We are interested in them being 100% self-supporting if we can make it on the business side of the equation, just like salaries, management, things they have to, capital investments, etc., things you would think of as traditional business costs. But in a business like this, as you can imagine, you have other costs that we call social costs that are like, a case manager to help you with your mental health problems, or a person to help place you in that next step job, or whatever that might be. So we don't expect them necessarily to cover all of those social costs through the business. But we do expect them to cover over time, usually a 3 to 5 year ramp up, the cost of the business, true business costs. So that's just on the business side. But we help them then set business metrics. So that's the business side. And then the social side, we help them think through what are they trying to accomplish on the social side. I mean, is this supposed to be jobs for these individuals forever? Do they want, health benefits and good pay and yada yada, and it's really just big companies that are going to employ lots of people? Or is this really a transitional deal? What this is about is a transition into the mainstream workforce. You get those jobs, you have them for a while, you school yourself up on how to work, you expunge your record, or at least you have a history beyond your record, and then you're going off into the mainstream workforce. Those are very different business models, very different models of employee supports and other things that you need, and objectives. Just what are you trying to actually accomplish? How many people are you going to employ? So sorting out what you're trying to do on the social side, we help them with that, figuring it out, and then making the connections that they need to make to other service providers or other companies in order to achieve those objectives. And then we help them take all those metrics and set up systems so that they're actually able to look, figure out what metrics are they going to measure themselves against, have some systems in place for actually doing that, including systems that will give them feedback, not just feedback to the boss and us, but feedback to them about what is working, dashboards and things that a normal business would want to have, what's working and what's not, and how are they doing. So that's kind of the full spectrum there. Just to give you, just step one toe in the water on the sort of second goal I mentioned to you. So we're also interested in this sort of replicable, sustainable model that can be done, all over the United States and every community in the country. So what does that mean, like in the context of a green streets? Well, for example, we have contacts because we have a broader reach with the federal government, like with HUD, Housing and Urban Development, which spends billions of dollars in the United States on the development of affordable housing. They're very interested in both protecting the properties they've invested in as an asset class and also economic development. One of their mission, that's part of their mission. So we're in conversation with them about McCormick Barron, and actually, as it turns out, several of the companies in our portfolio also have an affordable housing or supportive housing angle. So this is very interesting. That's a whole economy that could actually then create lots and lots of jobs for the people who actually live in those buildings, who otherwise are completely unemployed and are not able to really pay sufficient rent. And so that whole system is beginning to implode because of all those problems, right? So there's sort of a virtuous circle here. So we're in a position to begin to talk to HUD about that, and what, so how do we play that with McCormick Barron? Can we channel resources to them for what they're doing? Can we begin to export that model perhaps to other affordable housing, things like that. So that's just to give you some example. And we've also put together a group of leaders of this kind of social enterprise all over the country, job-creating social enterprise that's explicitly about these most disadvantaged populations, called SE4 Jobs Working Group. And that has participants now from about a dozen states. So we have sort of the nonprofit community together, and we're beginning to synthesize what we learn from models like MBR and from the evidence, or Green Streets, and from the evidence that we have, other evidence that we have of what works, and then put that to that group and also get them to share with us what are they learning, what are their techniques, and begin to build essentially it's essentially field building so that we're learning from each other and beginning to adapt, what's really working. And our aspiration is then to put a real brand on that so that that's universally recognizable. And this discussion we're having would be fast forwarded, immensely 5 years from now, because we'd be sitting here and I just call it something and you say, oh yeah, I know what that is because I've heard about that. It's not, instead of having to explain it in like 80 paragraphs, right, which is sort of where we stand now. So that's, I think in terms, so I just wanted to kind of lay that out. An interesting challenge, I know this might be fun for discussion, but I mean, I'm happy to talk about anything, is with the business community. There are sort of two things that we're trying to do with the business community now, the mainstream business community. One is, obviously, the way that many businesses, either you're marketing to individual consumers or you're doing, essentially business to business kind of marketing, right? And so most of our companies are not consumer focused. They're really selling services that, are janitorial or recycling or things like that. The t-shirt is a little anomalous. And even there, we weren't selling to individual consumers. We were selling to companies. So we're now trying to take a step up, and partly with the partnership with KKR and some other things, to talk to some larger companies about procurement. So there's a lot of incentive for companies to have a tier of procurement from minority and women-owned business, from small business, and many of them make a practice of that. The federal government kind of sets some measures for that. And that kind of thing. These businesses we're talking about, nonprofit-run social enterprise, they are nowhere on that queue. They're nowhere on that list. They don't fit in that, But we're interested in sort of bringing that world, in a sense, of affirmative kind of work with different kinds of businesses, in order to obtain larger procurements that maybe multiple agencies, many of these companies together could service essentially. And there is something similar to this that happens with the federal government now. It's called Ability One. That essentially there's an incentive in federal law for federal agencies to procure from a tier of nonprofit-run businesses that employ people with disabilities, severe disabilities, physical, developmental. And that does about $2 billion of goods and services with the federal government, employs about 45,000 people every year. $2 billion. So it's big. It's very big. No one's ever heard of it anywhere I've ever gone. So no surprise.
Ability One?
Ability One, you can look it up online. MISH, it's what it used to be called. 45,000 people employed.
Is there an overwhelmingly sourced?
A lot is military. A lot is military. So they have, there's a committee of all the procurement people from every federal agency. And the military Defense Department is one of their biggest buyers. And that's military uniforms, landscaping, they do a lot of shredding is one of their big, they started that with the CIA. You start with the CIA as your customer for shredding. You have a lot of business customers. It's a good reference. So, so anyway, so they do that. So in a way, we're aspiring to kind of open that up, not only federal procurement, but private procurement, and not only businesses for people with disabilities, but people with other problems who also need a glide path, into the workforce, right? So, so aspirationally, that's essentially what we're trying to do with business. And then, as you can imagine, the really exciting prospect there is, let's say, and we see this, let's say the big waste management company in town is buying some recycling services from one of our companies. Great. That creates jobs in our company on a transitional basis. And also it forms a business-to-business relationship with that waste management company. And then they're like, oh, maybe we could hire some of your people. We actually like your people. And, and then, well, you sent us the wrong person. We're actually looking for people with a different, profile or whatever. But it's a little different than the relationships they might have with the workforce system, which is very impenetrable. They can never figure out who to talk to. And I'm talking to a case manager or a job placement person who doesn't, that's very different than I'm in a business-to-business relationship. Neither one of us wants to screw up, and yet I'm interested in hiring your people, and so we see, the big ball game, in a sense. I mean, there's a lot to this, but would be over the long haul to begin to influence bigger businesses that are hiring a lot of entry-level workers to be willing to take some risk, or have some systematic way that some of these people could actually get into those jobs. And perhaps even some of the types of employee support mechanisms and things that work. for that, which is good for them because they have a lot. Businesses, as I'm sure you know, have a lot of turnover at the entry level, and it costs them a lot. So if they can improve on that and they can pick better people, it's actually worth it for them. But they don't spend much money on it because right now it's not worth it. So we're trying. So anyway, that's sort of the big picture, but the business angle of this is really, it's a huge challenge. I mean, I can articulate it to you, but actually making that happen, creating those procurement relationships and those hiring relationships is very complicated. And we have smallish businesses and sort of gaming that out. They have big procurement opportunities, and we have smallish businesses, and sort of how do we grow to be able to take on the size of procurements that are. I mean, it's just sort of a business puzzle. So that's basically what I thought I would share. If that's helpful. I'm game for any questions or comments.
Carla, our model started out as looking for kind of entrepreneurial nonprofits, helping them from an organizational capacity perspective, and then bringing the expertise to the partners to help those organizations grow.
Yes.
That's been very good for people kind of to learn about philanthropy, to learn about organizations. But as we've hopefully matured a little bit, we've been looking a little bit more at the collective impact kind of question, which you've thought a lot about, and particularly this intermediary notion. And I'm just curious, how have you done it? Because we're trying to figure out, particularly as partners get a little graduate from the initial philanthropic education in organizations, to try to think more strategically about impacting systems rather than organizations specifically. How have you guys done that? Because that's something we're trying to do, and trying to create systems to do that, and we haven't figured it out.
It's a small part.
Sorry.
But it's a profoundly important question, and I think actually, honestly, it's wonderful that you're taking on that question, because I came from a more traditional, government, social advocacy kind of background into the civil rights and things like that, into this work. And what I saw when I came over to REDF is this whole group of people like you who are here in this room. I mean, some of you may have had some of that, but who really come from a whole different arena, from business, which is so powerful. I mean, that's why I came over, into this work, because the people who have been working to try to solve these big social problems don't have the power or the skill set really to do it, and we haven't put the firepower that's required into that arena. Symbolically, it represents what we care about or what we don't, right? We care about wealth and more than we do about these social problems. It's just the reality in the United States. But what's exciting, I think, about what you've been doing, sort of this nascent movement that's been growing of business getting really serious about, how to bring your networks of knowledge into this arena. I just think there's tremendous power there. But I do think that there was maybe some, hubris at the beginning on both ends. It's sort of people who have been more traditional government and philanthropy and nonprofits, resentful of people in business thinking that they knew everything, and then people in business thinking these people who are on the other side don't know what they're doing, and so heroically we will come in and. And I think that as time goes by now, we're all like, oh, actually, there's some really powerful things that the other knows that might be helpful. So I think, I can tell you a few more specific ideas, but I do think that some of what needs to happen is sort of where I started, which is I deeply believe, from what I've seen, what I've observed, to solve the big problems, we need business, government, philanthropy, and nonprofits. I mean, which is easy to say, and we have lots of, public-private partnerships, sure. But, how many, but really a lot of the way we come at each other is quite um, not very respectful, actually. So we say we want to do that, but it's sort of, we're going to bring you something and you don't understand what we're talking about. It's sort of, too much of what goes on. So I think that on a very practical level, it's honestly, it's just thinking, if you believe that, if you believe it takes all four sectors, and we're going through this right now, then you need to develop a strategy for each of those four sectors. What are their aligned interests? They're not going to be aligned on everything. It's not in business's interest 100% to help, criminals get jobs. I mean, it's, but where are the points of alignment? Can we find the points of alignment? Where would their incentives be? And let's speak directly to those incentives. Government has a very different set of incentives around these people. Nonprofits, some will be threatened by the idea of doing this. Others, where are their incentives? What are their issues? Philanthropy, what are its issues? And then, structurally, what do we need to do to engage those different sectors? I mean, do we need the leadership? Do we need the worker bees? Do we need the managers? Who can actually help us make these? Who are the decision makers, and how do we get them, to buy in to play ball? In a really concrete sense, what I found is in the social sector, there's way too much time spent on the problem, and there's way too little time spent on solving the problem, the solution to the problem, because it's just a lot of what are all the problems, let's define the problems, let's, the scope of the problem. So what I found is if you can come up with something, and I think supportive housing was a wonderful example of this, and frankly I think social enterprises too, that actually you can, you do the initial work and you demonstrate some results, so there's something there, and then you gather people from these different arenas to do something very concrete and very positive. Not to define the problem, not to figure out a lot of things that are very complicated, just to get something done. Because what you find is the doers want to come around when there's something to be done, and the people who don't really get too much done want to come around when it's a lot of discussion about, what's the problem and how do we think about it. So if you can get people around the table to do something very concrete and very specific together that maybe is a little out of their comfort zone and shows them, my interests actually are aligned with that group's interests, and I get to know the people individually, then, and you can keep them. If you can keep the right people at the table, and that means, having a really good process and knowing what you're trying to do together, I think there's a lot of power in that, and that you can begin to build real change from there. And I think you want to go for quick wins, as quick as you can get to them, so that everybody's feeling that they've, it's a plus for them, to whoever they're reporting to, so it's worth it. And then there's an eagerness then to get more involved. I think the other thing, obviously, I would think for you, for any group doing this, is to get clear about what your objectives, as clear as you can about what your objectives are. Sort of not to bite off too much, but not to bite off too little. It's kind of somewhere in there.
If I can ask one follow-up, and I don't mean to monopolize the questions, but when you were talking, this idea came that let's assume we wanted to partner with REDF and bring the model down to Santa Clara.
Yeah.
The Valley.
Yes.
And partnering with you so we could get some of your expertise in how to do it.
Yeah.
And then we've got the man and woman power to go and connection to go out and do that.
Yeah.
Is that something you might be interested in?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I mean, what we're trying to figure out, when I came to REDF, we were 5 people at the Presidio. It was a small group just focused on the Bay Area, and had done some powerful research and writing so that we were better known, obviously, for social return on investment, et cetera. But we didn't have a big infrastructure, and now we're just growing. So we're going statewide in California. We now have groups in Los Angeles as well as the Bay Area. We'll have a few more soon. And we're our kind of strategy for the next 5 years is both to be all over California, a few thousand more people into the workforce, as well as develop the sustainable, replicable model, right, nationally. So we put these groups together. One element of that is figuring out what role should REDF play. And I've, having run an intermediary at the Corporation for Supportive Housing and seeing what it takes to put offices everywhere and sustain them and all of that, I'm looking for other approaches that could be partnerships like this. I'm very interested in that. We actually just did a very interesting session with a group in the state of Washington called Building Changes. That's quite a wonderful intermediary there in the homeless arena. And we basically did a day with them. Like, here are our tools, here's what we do, here's how we go about this. And they went back to sort of think about it. So, yeah, I mean, could we have an engaged conversation about that and explore that? Absolutely. I'm very interested, deeply interested in that.
One of the things that seems powerful about the way you're doing what you're doing relative to sort of the more generic model that we have is that you have a problem you're trying to address.
Yes.
That seems to be wildly focusing for the organization because you're already in a, and even halfway through your conversation, I wanted to say, so what exactly do you do? But I know that within the problem, stitching together all the other people who are trying to solve the problem, you can get tangible much faster than we're going to have an international round. And we're going to define what that is this year, next year, maybe. That's a pretty broad space. So what's your perspective on organizations that are focused on a mission and a goal and objective of their own versus sort of just wanting to do good and are flexible about ways in which we do good and problems that actually get solved on an annual basis within multiple investment areas?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just think they're different. I mean, those are just different. I mean, everyone's motivated differently. You can't. You have to do what motivates you. For me, in terms of my own work, I'm motivated by trying to solve problems, and I like to focus on something and take it all the way as far as so it really has a real impact. I think. So I don't know. I'm not sure that I know. I mean, I've not really. I mean, probably I worked for the state of California at the Legislative Analyst's Office, and I worked for the Welfare Department in San Francisco, and we had pretty broad reach in those positions. And I don't know. I mean, I think focus is important, and sticking with things is important. And, these big problems that we're trying to solve, they're not going to be solved in a year or two. So I don't know. I'm not sure I have anything all that useful to offer on that. But I certainly have seen the impact when you really do focus on something and take it through. My sense, I mean, really, and I think there is something to this. It's about 15 years or so to really take something from some nascent stage up to something a lot more significant. And I've seen that in a lot of different areas. That doesn't mean you've solved all the problems of the world by then, but that something's really had a major, beginning to have a major impact.
Now, when you're sitting at the level that you are as an intermediate, do you ever identify a gap and then go advocate for the creation of an organization that you could help support, or are you always finding pre-existing?
We are really finding pre-existing organizations. I mean, we're doing a very specific thing. We're trying to create as many we're trying to create opportunities for as many people as possible to get jobs and move into the workforce. So for us, it's about how many of those opportunities can we create, and so that people are successful in getting those jobs and moving into the workforce. So we're really looking at organizations that have some track record and have some capacity and have some experience. That's not to say we're not going to help them with a lot of the areas that they may need help in order to get where they want to go, but we're I would say in the early days we did more that was more or less startup, and that's just not that's not our sweet spot. We're trying to take this, really, I mean, in the next 5 years, we want this to go to a very different place nationally. So, we really need entities that are capable of moving pretty quickly. And what I see is, you need nonprofits with some business orientation and infrastructure in order to do that, and a real connection to the people that we're trying to employ.
I have a question on the social. I'm sorry. On the social side, so I think what you're doing is amazing. I had one response is, "Wow, this is incredible." So it seems like people, when they get off track and they eventually get on track and are doing the right thing, often their past follows them.
Yeah.
And so now they're working and they're doing the right thing, but they've had priors and they may not have the skills to operate in this environment. And so I think that seems to me a huge challenge.
Yes.
That somebody has made this transition and commitment and is now working, but drags all of this other stuff and in addition doesn't have the skill set to. So how do you address that?
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. So if you look at the evidence from research around the country on employing people who have major barriers, the evidence all has been that we don't know the answer to the question that you're asking, that is the question. You put your finger right on it, and that's really difficult. We can, if we pay people's wages to, be in a job for a while, we can do that, or we create social enterprise, we can do that. But then how do we really keep people employed over the long haul? There are inklings of things that seem to help. There are things like incentives, literally payment, cash incentives to keep people both on the job, sort of making little markers on staying on the job, as well as coming back to sort of that home base where there is a network of support, where there's both professional support and also peer support, right?
So if they stay within the network,
so if they come back, maybe they get a little payment for that, or to try to keep them involved in some kind of support. There's also this notion, which we're incorporating this into some of the grant funding that we're making and partnering that we're trying to do, essentially of retention services, which you could think of, in a sense, it's like employee support program plus, right? Many of us have had that on the job. I have a mental health problem. I can make a call, get a psychologist, and go see them, use my health insurance to pay for it. If you're very, very low wage, and you often don't have any of that, and maybe you need something a little different, like, my car broke down this morning, and I was in a violent episode last night, and I'm just going to blow up my job right now.
Right.
Like, okay, well, don't not call your employer, and sort of helping guide people on, very basic things. And then there are also other things, just when people originally get the job, around, things that you can do to deal with your record if you need to, or your credit, or things like that. And then also, how do you talk to employers about, let's say, a history of incarceration or something like that, or a period of unemployment because of homelessness or something, some skills around doing that, things like that. So, that's sort of an array. But that's we're calling it the Employee Supports Program right now, but, it's, but yes, and I'm not saying it's all figured out, but we're trying to, kind of glean the best we can from everything we know, from the evidence, the practice, and, share that so that we can get better and better at it. Because I don't think this is rocket science. It's just we haven't quite navigated it, figured it out
because it's discouraging. Yet. I think someone starts on the right path, doing the right thing, and, just hit some bumps in the road that seem overwhelming.
Which is the path. That is going to be what's going to happen. And I think the other beauty, which is interesting, of the social enterprise, which I just love about it, and this is in fact happens with many of the groups. So I get a job in a social enterprise, I do okay, I get my next job, and then I blow out of that job, or that job blows up, because a lot of it just does. I can come back. So it's not just, I completed my job training program, so I'm done. No, I can come back on the work crew. Let's say I'm, kind of making it, so I don't go do another crime and go to prison. I come back on the work crew, I get the services again, I go back out. So there is that infrastructure, which is pretty amazing.
Thank
I'm curious about your definition of sustainability and how you really evaluate that in the various contexts, because it would seem to me that you'd almost have a different definition of sustainability for a lot of your organizations, depending on time frame, resources, where they are at the beginning. So how do you how do you apply that?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. What we're aiming for is as much as possible taking all that into account, but laying out sort of a trajectory, year over the next some years, set of objectives, to get to the point that there's a sustainable model minimally for the business, for the actual jobs, right? The service side of the system, I mean, this is my experience, and I saw this at the supportive housing. Excuse me. The kind of the funding and the organizations, there's an ebb and flow to that. It's very troublesome and very difficult. I mean, I don't want to understate that. But, government funds this and then it pulls back, or philanthropy is hot on this topic and then it pulls back, or what, groups come, they go. It's a little, there's some give and take around that. But what I found with supportive housing, and I think it applies here too, is if you have something very concrete, like in supportive housing's case, a unit of housing that's affordable to and available to people with big problems, then the rest of the service system really wants to come play ball with you because you have something that they really need. And I think it's true with jobs too. We have jobs for people. The rest of the service system and the monies and the groups and everything else is attracted to wanting to figure out how to work with you because you have something that they very badly need. So that's not an easy answer, but we're really looking for viability for the financial model of the business so that those job slots are not dependent on whether government this year chooses to provide subsidies for wages, but actually are more in the flow of a real business, procurement relationships and that kind of thing, and can pretty much sustain based on that. And then, the services, there may need to be fundraising or partnering, and there's some ebb and flow to that. That's how we look at it. Does that answer
Do you
your
work with the organization to provide that? I mean, what's your interface with that?
Well, we do a lot of interface with the organizations. I mean, when we first, we select, we're careful about selection. When we select an organization for our portfolio, we enter into a memorandum of understanding with them. Each year, we assume a multi-year relationship, but then we do annual, we look at that annually if we've met our objectives together. The MOU lays out things they're going to do, things we're going to do, and what the objectives are. We do a tool. We use a tool that is adapted from some very readily available tools, but we kind of figured it out. Adapted it ourselves, called Goal. That we fill out. The organization fills out. Staff, management, board, and then we look where the anomalies. And those are about capacity essentially to get to those objectives, and then we use that as part of figuring out what our work plan is together. And then we just work against that plan. We meet together. We have venture committee meetings every month. We're in contact with these organizations very, very frequently. Sometimes every few days. I mean, it's a real, very, very deep kind of relationship.
Just to drill a little bit deeper, do you have a separate trajectory for the business metrics and the social ones?
Yes. And I would say in the history of REDF, we focused a lot more on the business side, and we focused on the social metrics. We wanted the social outcomes in terms of these are the people employed, but sort of the employee supports piece, the technical assistance we might provide or capacity building, that's newer for us. But yes, we are doing that, and we do incorporate the social metrics and the business metrics into sort of one overarching.
And it's only 5 year, or do you have?
We're hoping for a 3 to 5 year relationship with these groups, and that's our objective. yeah, we as you probably know, we were the only California-based recipient of a Social Innovation Fund grant from the federal government. And that's from the Corporation for National and Community Service, and that was over a two-year period, but it's a 5-year program agreement with the federal government. So if we're so fortunate as that it's refunded, we could conceivably get another 3 years of funding from that. We have to match it dollar for dollar with private resources. And in order to reach the objectives of the big plan that we've set out, everything we've set out to you, I'm doing a lot of fundraising. I mean, it's, this is not done yet. But I just, of course, I think what we're doing is of such great value. I'm quite hopeful that we'll move in the right direction.
And are you seeing corporations with their CSR hats on being more responsive to this now? Or
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of responsiveness and a lot of interest. I really do. And I think, we aspire to, companies really seeing this as part of the way they do business, a natural part of the way they do business. Working with companies like ours and, all over the country. I mean, I'd like to see a big umbrella over the groups that are more for the disabled, but to do business, and the groups that are more for, other kinds of populations. This is one significant approach that every community can take to making sure that some of the people who just are always left out of all the programs we've tried actually get into the workforce. I mean, when I meet people like the people running Green Streets, and I think that they could be not working at all instead of what they're doing, which is so productive. I mean, many of them you can see, given a different background, would be leading companies, literally. I mean, they have all those talents and skills and attributes. And instead we might completely have all of their talents absent. And in fact, the negative, worse, even negative behavior's worse,
Right.
is a huge loss to the society that I don't think we can bear. And we're not just talking about a few people here. This is a lot of people. So social enterprise is not the answer to all of it. But I do think that it can have a powerful impact if it was embedded in every community, as sort of a natural part of doing business. So we aspire to that. We are not, I do think with the business community we have a long way to go. I think there's more understanding in nonprofits, philanthropy, and government about this than there is business right now.
I don't know if you know that there's a bill going through the Assembly to change or to create a new corporation type.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
L3C.
for-profit.
I think they're very interesting. I mean, I like these new forms, and I think they could end up being very viable or very useful for this. We're not quite sure yet. We're trying to sort that through, but yeah, I think that's really exciting.
Do you have organizations anywhere, but particularly locally here, that are sort of a peer group for you? That focus on social enterprise and
or
on your population.
Yeah, a lot of people ask us if there are other groups that are exactly like us, and we have not run across other than actually, interestingly, this one that's essentially a public entity. That's the intermediary for Ability One niche is similar because they market to the federal government, and then they provide technical assistance and capacity building support to the nonprofits that run the businesses. So it's actually quite similar. We have a very wonderful relationship with them. We're working together. So I haven't found a lot. But, the groups that we tend to identify with and talk with are more sort of the venture philanthropy groups, because we do business similarly. In DC, we venture philanthropy partners, or Tipping Point, or or kind of organizations like that.
Do you ever work with, and these may just be like this, just regular philanthropies where they'll have maybe a sort of a different criteria, but again, they think what you're doing is attractive, so they may just do grants, and you can sort of support each other through a different, even though you have slightly different objectives in how you evaluate the project.
Yes, I mean, there are several foundations in the Bay Area, and there's interest in LA and nationally now interest in supporting our work, and I think those are very much partnerships. They're essentially trying to achieve their objectives by supporting what we do, and I think they understand sort of the value of both the business assistance and this kind of intermediary role in carrying out the objectives that they have. I mean, Mitchell Kapor's foundation, for example, is very, very interested in green jobs and how do people who would not, might be left out of those jobs actually get them. Well, they saw what we were doing, and they're wonderful. They're interested, so they're a supporter of ours because we can help carry out the objectives that they have. And there are other foundations might be interested in, particularly in homelessness or criminal justice issues, and so they see a way to carry out their own objectives by working with us. So yes, I think that's very powerful partnership. And I hope I over time, I think as more philanthropy gets involved, and we're at a moment now where I'm really trying to get them engaged, we're able to form them into sort of a learning community around this. And we did that actually with supportive housing. There's a wonderful national community called Funders Together that's been around now for about 10 years. And it's been a great network of philanthropy all over the United States, focused on homelessness. Melville Charitable Trust has been a big leader in that group, but there have been many, many other foundations involved in that.
Can you talk a little bit about mentoring impact?
Yes.
Fabulous question.
Yes. Yes. So we measure impact in a number of different ways. So we're interested in what happens to the people who get jobs. Do their wages go up? Do their life improve? Setting those kinds of objectives. They stop going back to prison, reductions in homelessness, et cetera. So and we've now set a big objective on numbers of people that we want to get into the workforce, 2,500 over a certain period of time. And then we've set a very, very, very high bar for ourselves of 70% in jobs a year after getting social enterprise done. So we're working on that. So we set those objectives. And then we help the organizations to measure, so that they have something in place. We try not to overcomplicate that, but systems in place to measure that. So for the people, then we're interested in the organization, the nonprofit itself, just the health of the nonprofit. So certain metrics around that, just how the financials and organizationally, how is the shell? We didn't used to look at that as much, but if it's the nonprofit running the business, the nonprofit needs to be healthy. So a few objectives around that. And then third channel is the business. So we have business metrics, just, have you created the number of jobs you said you were going to create? Are you bringing in the revenue you thought you were going to bring in? Clear business metric. And then the fourth, which is the one that we're most known for, which is very challenging, is sort of for society, is a social return on investment. And we did a lot of work around that in the early days, and we've continued to evolve our thinking on it. We're now kind of taking that on again in a more serious way. And there are a lot of things that are difficult about that, and we're actually really intrigued with the collective impact thinking that's going on. Because one of the things that's hard about that is how do you attribute, societal impact to one organization? Generally it's not just one organization that creates that impact, and so how do we take into account the costs and benefits if it's broader? And then second to that, you really do need pretty good, just traditionally good data on whether or not what you've done as compared to not doing it is better or worse, right? And generally that comes from what we call random assignment studies, or some kind of comparison group study, at least, even if it's not random assignment.
Over a long
some sort of
period of
comparison over some period, at least a few years, right? So we're, and this is something the federal government's interested in as part of the Social Innovation Fund. They want to take the evidence base up, as we go. So we've entered into a partnership with Mathematica, which is very well known and very well respected, and we're beginning to craft what a real sort of that type of comparison group evaluation for this portfolio
Are
could
you
look
going
like.
to be able to track the people who are in your study who are basically going back to jail?
Yeah, I mean that's what we're hoping to do. That's what we're hoping to do. Now I'll tell you something very interesting. This is a sad reality, which I hope we can change. You would think, so what we've done in the past is we've interviewed as many people as we could who got a job 2 years, 6 months, 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years later. Very expensive proposition. And you lose a lot of people. I mean, it's just really difficult. And the data, it suffers because, you can see inklings. We've seen, 3/4 of the people we could interview 2 years later were in the workforce. Fantastic. But then we couldn't also find some of the people. So, it's good, but it's not good enough. And the most objective way to look at things would be at least minimally to be able to get tax data, as later. So you can see, are people earning money or not? Are they on unemployment or not? And you can't get it. You just can't get a hold of it. In California is one of the hardest places. What we're trying to look at now is might we be able to do this with like cohorts, so you're not getting sort of each individual name, but at least you know a whole group, what happened to a whole group or something like that. And we're starting to discuss this with the Department of Labor and others, who are in the field, because we all need this data. How do you track ultimately the success of any of these job-related programs if we can't find objective data for where people ended up a few years out? And in some states it is a little bit easier, but in our state it's really been tough. And it's not easy anywhere. So there's something we need to do about that. We got to change that.
After school programs, and likely schools too, but I just know from being in a meeting with the after school programs that we funded together with a couple other funders, a learning community of 9 OST groups, and a couple of them have access to school system data on their kids, and the rest don't. Has to do with either pre-existing district relationships, working with foster youth, and so having kind of special access. But the rest of the room, upon hearing this, was salivating, right? Because the huge challenge, same thing in schools, right? For K-12, you're helping these kids, and then the data's there, right? It's in the computer. You just
can't get it. Yeah, and I know with college, it's a big issue. Yeah.
So I think
it is a big issue, but I think we're pushing on it, and hopefully we'll get somewhere.
Do they have an incentive to the people in the program to stay connected? If they report this information, is there any kind of win for them? Or?
Right. Yes. That's what we did. We tried to provide some, some incentives, but it's still not great. Just over a couple of years. Excuse me. When you were, especially the younger, when I was 19, I don't know that I would have stayed in touch with anything for more than.
I try to forget this.
And then for whatever reason, you skew toward the people who are motivated by the incentive, be it.
Yeah, exactly. To the extent you can, you want more objective data. But but we put a high premium on on the measurement of results. Essentially because we want to do as well as we can with the scarce resources that exist to do this kind of work, and we want to. And the groups are really hungry to know what works and what doesn't.
So what's the one thing you look for in a partner or an organization to get involved with? Is there, aside from everybody looks for funding, but is there anything else that
a partner? You mean more not the group, not the portfolio?
Right. For example, what would you like to see from a group
like groups that we work with? I have to say, honestly, the top issue for us in both regards, portfolio and partners, is people. The people involved. Ultimately, I could, sure, I could tell you what we like this and that. We could talk about what we would really have to offer each other, but it's the people involved. Can you work together? Do you have the same interests? Are you able to get things done? Yes, that's what we're interested in.
There's that bias toward action coming out of it.
Yeah,
True.
bias toward
It's
action,
true.
you know.
You could meet for 5 years about how to work together.
Yeah, credibility, integrity, honesty, respect in the community. I mean, you know, we have a, you know, we're trying to, you know, we want to have a long time at this, and, reputation.
So, do you have one more question?
Well, I was just saying, are you seeing a lot of new entrants into it, into
Good
the
question.
area, given the new emphasis, or relative new emphasis on the schools are having on social enterprise and the innovation that can be around these sort of solutions? Are there, is the more hopeful rise of people who want a partnership or providing a social network, a business network?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yes. I mean, and certainly over the 4 years I've been with REDF, I've seen a lot of interest. I mean, one thing I should mention, you know, we have this incredible program we call the Farber program that takes MBA interns from the best schools in the country in the summer, and they are placed in the social enterprises that we work with, as well as at REDF. And they do 3 or 4 projects. It's an outstanding, there's professional development. It's an outstanding program, and we now have more than 100 alumni. And then in addition to that, we do a Farber fellowship program where post-MBAs can come and work for a year with one of our enterprises, and that's also really powerful. And I think this whole question about human capital and development of people who can really run these kind of double bottom line businesses and things like that is something we still have a long way to go with that, but I do see much more interest, enthusiasm, excitement about that.
Do you worry that it's just the current, shiny bright object and then it will go back?
I don't know. I don't. I think that, we were talking about this when I first walked in. I mean, I just think, to me, everything in this country, what's been happening over the last, 5 years, certainly 10 years. I mean, I just think things are driving in this direction. We have some very big problems to deal with, and those problems are going to require all these different arenas kind of working together. And it's not only about profit, and it's not only about these social issues. It really, I think people more and more see that these things are in concert and are motivated by that, are interested in that. And I don't think that's going to go away.
Good. I'm hopeful too. That's the
A
case.
great note to probably end on.
Yes, and then I'll
Carla,
just pass these so you can
you-
enjoy the.
Thank
You
you.
are such a leader in the field, and my brain is worrying, and I think everyone's are. And on top of all of that worrying is the thought that of all of the hats you wear and all of the things you do, you took this time to be with us.
Thank you. It's an honor to
And
be
I have a feeling people will be talking about this, will want to continue the conversation, and so I hope that this was a great investment in some great stuff ahead.
Absolutely. I think
Thank
what
you
you
for-
do is incredibly wonderful and so meaningful and so important for getting, solving these problems. So thank you.
Thank you for your
Thank you very much.
And your brain. Your brain.
Yeah, I do have two
And she has some
pagers
other-
if anybody's interested.